Yeah, I'm starting it right now.
Yeah, go for it.
Alrighty, 1 second. Let's just see if it's coming on or not. And we're good. Okay, we're fine. We're ready to go. And I hear myself. That is fantastic.
No, that was my fault.
No, that was me. I actually had the thing in the background, and
Oh,
after I
okay.
started hearing myself. So don't worry, that's not you. Um, like, so as you, what were you about to say before we jumped on?
Well, you mentioned the Vikings, and
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
I've heard these accounts, and even Kalindi Ii speaks about this. I don't know if you've heard him talk about the African tribes who would take psilocybin and go out and kill a lion.
Right.
Like yeah, it made them fearless in their hunting. It was even part of Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory that
Exactly. And
yeah,
I actually did some reading on that.
yeah. But if you recall, in Terence McKenna's Stoned Ape, he specifically cites low doses as an aid to hunting. So you know what I mean. So like he thought that with the lower doses, it gave you better visual acuity. That you can sharper edges. You can notice things a little bit better. Your sphere of awareness extends further. You can hear the most subtle of sounds around you. And
Right.
so this would obviously be a benefit if you're a hunter.
Right.
And yeah, so um, I totally agree with all that. But if you listen on to some of his talks, man, I can link you to some. I think the most
Please.
interesting one is called Plants, Consciousness, and Transformation. It's about an 8-hour talk of Terence McKenna on the stoned ape hypothesis.
Interesting.
And yeah, so like he'll go through these levels of low dose, mid-range dose. So they took the low doses for hunting. The mid-range doses were more for orgiastic activity amongst the apes, like mating. So they would all jumping each other's bones in a huge heap, basically. But then there is the high dose, which is what Terence McKenna called the heroic dose. And at that point, you can no longer meddle with your significant other. You can not even walk on this experience. You're basically nailed to the ground, dealing with a mystery that has pretty much haunted our entire history. And
I
so,
love
yeah. So it's very interesting to hear Terence McKenna speak on these things. He used a lot of metaphors like, a culture is your operating system, and relating it to kind of like computers, that the society and culture you live in is akin to the software you use on your computer. And it has certain parameters. Certain things are accepted, certain things are rejected. um,
Right.
you know but it all could be remade. And so the idea behind was the psychedelic is a kind of like a reboot or a reset into an entirely either new operating system or older, much older than even the shamans themselves, something written in the language and the DNA itself. And he spoke about it in that fashion. And but it is a good criticism. I think I thought about it. The things like the Vikings or even the Mayans and their human sacrifices. They would in some of these events they would sacrifice 30,000 human beings at a time.
Exactly.
You know, and so like where is the universal love at that point?
Right.
But if you actually, and I went into it very deeply, like a lot of these, like I told you, I studied comparative religion.
Right.
I look very deeply into each one of these religions. And the Mayans, they held a very interesting view on reality itself, that these sacrifices, if you look closely at them, sure, they have maybe they sacrificed people that were very sinful amongst them, but at the same time, there's accounts where they pick the most beautiful women, or they'll pick the strongest of all the hunters in the society. You know, they'll in other words, the best of the best.
Yeah, would be chosen
Yeah,
sometimes.
were chosen for these sacrifices. And so you would think, like, why are they ridding of their something that would have been held to the highest regard in their society? It's very interesting, and I don't know if you've ever read this, but they had a view of reality that if these sacrifices weren't made, that reality itself would cease to exist.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Exactly. Yes, I did read on that. And
yeah,
that was something that I actually wanted to delve into as well, because we know that these cultures did have access to mushrooms that did, I don't want to say warp their perception, but gave them a different
yeah,
perception. But I do think that these cultures too did have something that was like the heroic dose during their time. That's why they had shamans. That's why they had these
yes,
things that were individuals who would lead these not progressions, but these ceremonies and
yes,
stuff like that. And for me, the thing is that I would kind of look at the shaman being the one that was in charge within these societies.
mhm,
And that means that their perception that they had on the world was formed, and this is one thing that I would kind of agree with, was that the memery, which became our religion in and of itself, came from these individuals underneath certain either substances, religious experiences, or whatever the situation may be.
mhm,
And if that is the case, then the thing that I see is that a lot of times is based on the interpretation of the individual and the shaman and what they perceived and what they believe they perceived. If it was either like, okay, the reality of the world is going to break down if we don't
yeah,
sacrifice people, or equilibrium is not going to be reached if those who are the worst in society aren't sacrificed, or whatever the situation may be.
mhm,
And it kind of brings to me a thought where it's like, okay, so it's not only the experience, but how one interprets one experience.
yeah,
And I think that is the dangerous aspect also about magic mushrooms in a sense, because it can warp one's ideals in a way where looking at human sacrifice is looked at as a good, or
yeah,
looking at, let's just say, somebody going berserk, for instance, in someone's army or raiding force, is a good perspective because you are reaping an area and bringing it into your fold in a
yeah,
sense. So it's very interesting. I find history kind of shows two perspectives, just like how you stated beforehand. The Jainists, which I
yeah.
do find are extremely peace and loving individuals, and
Mhm.
I would even say the Buddhists as well. So I would put the Jainists and Buddhists kind of together.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, but I also see certain other individuals that did have these type of experiences go down a wrong path and go down a path of putting more people in suffering rather than enlightening individuals. What would you say about that?
the way I think about that, because there is modern examples. Like if you think about, there's Hollywood stars that go down to Peru to try ayahuasca, right?
Mm,
And you would some of them have like, there's this one on Days of Our Lives. I can't remember his name, but he was an actor on the show Days of Our Lives,
right.
and he went down to Peru. He tried ayahuasca, and when he came back to America, he quit the show. And the reason he quit the show is because he felt that he was contributing to the dumbing down of America. Like he felt he was some kind of you know pawn in some game where he was just being used to lower the IQ of everyone else. And
Wow.
yeah, so he just quit the show flat out right there.
That's
And so
crazy. I didn't know that.
yeah,
Okay.
I'll get his name, for you, definitely.
Hmm.
But then there's other examples where people who aren't Um, I kind of said this earlier when I was talking about my own experience, where I felt like suicide was the only way out.
Right.
And some people, when they take it, instead of when they don't have any like religious background or any type of religious knowledge, they may develop a sense of megalomania, where they think like this insight's only being imparted to me, therefore I'm almost like Christ in return, like I am God himself,
Mm,
and no one else. You can develop this huge sense of your ego can get inflated, in other words.
exactly.
Yeah. And so like I've always when I saw that distinction, I've always thought of things like Hinduism or Buddhism were kind of preparing the disciple or the practitioner, whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
to be able to interpret the experience in such a way where that doesn't happen. And so I that's how I kind of see it now. I think it can be dangerous if you're led to your own intellectual thought to try to make sense of it. But we have a vast repertoire of religious knowledge that has been laid out throughout history that to draw from. And that's one thing I didn't realize when I went into it, because while I may have been an armchair philosopher as a pothead teenager, I never really looked very deeply into any of the religions. I was actually maybe more agnostic or atheist myself, would be prior to having my own experience. And when I started, and it was the phenomenon itself, it was undergoing the phenomenon itself that led me to go very deeply and study religion. I don't know why it influenced me that way, but that was like I became very obsessed of wanting to learn about all the world's major religions, and particularly mysticism, the mysticism of all the world's major religions, all the spiritual techniques
Like
that they use.
Sufism and
Yeah.
the rest of the so.
So I looked into all the mystics of Islam, the Sufi mystics, the Christian mystics. I looked into the yogis of Hinduism. The Buddhas of so-called Buddhism. So in Buddhism, they make this distinction between a Buddhist and a Buddha. A Buddhist is someone who's seeking nirvana. A Buddha is someone who's attained it already.
Mm,
So I started paying attention to not what the Buddhists are saying, but what the Buddhas are saying, if that
mm.
makes sense. That's why I kind of focused on mysticism, because mysticism, as you may read a description if you Google it, if you go to the Google dictionary, it's a union with the divine or union with God. Man realizes his union with God.
Mhm.
And so, in other words, the mystics are vouchsafe the insight to the true nature of God. So that's why I kind of focused all my attention towards mystics, because I felt they were saying something towards the mystical experience, towards this phenomenon that really no one else was saying within any religion. Not the theologian, not the priest, or because the priest never had it. Meister Eckhart put it this way. He said, the theologians may quarrel, but the mystics of the world speak the same language, trying to say that they draw from the same insight. They draw from their mystical experience. Whereas the theologian is someone who is like us. They grow up and with their intellect are trying to decipher scripture, and they may have biases. They may read into the text. They may interpret it in a certain fashion. They may become ego inflated. They may
Mm.
led astray. And so that's kind of the Occam's razor I used when studying religion, is to
Makes sense.
focus on mysticism.
Because but that's the thing though, that I when I look at it, because I think that the mystics, when you state that they speak the same language, I think the reason why it seems that they do, until you start questioning them more, I think, because I've spoke to individuals who claim themselves to be mystics, not individuals who might not be quote unquote known, but have spoken to individuals who have stated that they had religious experiences. They have stated that they have some sort of knowledge
Like
of
a modern day mystic, or
something along those lines. Now, I mean, how much water can you really give these individuals of what
yeah.
they're telling you is being
Would you be
truthful?
able, like, are they just average people you've spoken to, or is it like someone like Sadhguru, famous individuals who claim to have?
It's the individuals are not famous, so that's why I'm saying look at it, you got to take what they say with water in a
Yeah.
sense, like how much do you put within the words that they state.
Oh yeah,
But in
definitely.
the beginning, it does sound like they do have something. It does sound like, okay, wow, these people are having the same kind of vertical experience until you start asking more in depth questions to the individual. And then
Sure.
it just seems like, oh, okay, well, now it seems there's differences. Now it seems that for sure they claim that it's this particular
Yeah.
essence or this particular deity, right?
Yeah.
Now, I do need to speak to individuals that are higher mystics, just like the individual that
Yeah,
you spoke
definitely, man. The people I try to contact are, like people more famous names, like Sadhguru is one of them.
of.
There's another guy who runs the Sat Yoga Institute. Damn, I can't remember his name, but that's the institute he runs. There's other famous people who claim non-dualism, that they've had this phenomenon occur, and those are more the people I focus on. The average person on the street, see, if you've had this phenomenon in yourself and it's truly one of the same, the kind of the criticism you're making in saying that there's differences is very similar to the criticism that perennial philosophy gets. Because remember, the perennial philosophy is a view on the major religions that sees a common core, that sees no distinction or differences at the very core of religion.
Mhm.
So there's a brand of people that call themselves constructivists, and they criticize the perennial philosophy, and they try to say that, well, if you really examine these, the peak and these highest points of mystical experiences, if you really examine them, you'll find that there's differences. And and the way they make that criticism is to say that there's nuances from the individual that pour into the experience. They're bringing some kind of baggage from their own personal history,
Mhm.
and they kind of like what I was saying earlier of how the lighter side of the spectrum of mystical experience is unique to the individual. If you're a devout Christian, you'll see Christ on the cross.
Right.
If you're a Muslim, you'll see Muhammad, and so forth.
Mhm.
But the proponents at Johns Hopkins will argue against that. That they will say that there is evidence for a common core, because at the height of this experience, in the so-called complete mystical experience, it seems to be a universal phenomenon. It's no longer tied to the baggage of your personal history. It has nothing to do with your personal history. The ego is dead at that point. That's why they talk about ego
Ego
death.
death. Right.
Yeah. And so at that point, you're describing something that transcends the culture itself. It's a phenomenon. It may be happening in, like, let's say you take a heroic dose tonight and you have this happen to you.
Mhm.
In other words, you're experiencing something that has been experienced throughout the ages, that the Buddha experienced 500 BC, or or a shaman experienced 10,000 years before the Buddha, and or even Christ experienced at ground zero on our Gregorian calendar, you know. So you that's what the neuroscientists will argue, that it's the phenomenon is transcendent of the culture, because because it's universal. It's a phenomenon in consciousness, and wherever in culture and wherever the epoch in time it arrives in, that mystic will express it in his language of the time, in his religion of the time, and he will, or if there is no religion prior to him, he would become a founder of a religion. So
Absolutely. And I think because you hit up a really good points there. And I think that when we really look into it, right? Because I'm not trying to look at it like a constructivist does.
Mhm.
The thing that I'm trying to look at is that, look, if an individual is a Sufi, let's just say, or if an individual is a monk, or if an individual is a Buddhist, or whatever the situation may be, my question in and of these mystics is
Mhm.
that why do you still hold the baggage of your religion when you realize that these religions might have a certain point, right? They might have some aspects of them, of their religious foundations, to be quote unquote true. But the thing is that if we look at it in its entirety, it is not true. And that's why most people state, or if you ask a mystic, they would sometimes say that um, the majority of world religions are quote unquote certain percentage correct, certain, but mostly incorrect. And if we really look at it in that perspective, then why do the mystics stick to the religions that they understand to be not fully correct?
Yeah, I think I can try to address that.
Sure.
So I recall in our previous discussion, I gave the story of Gautama, the original Buddha.
Right.
And I made the point that Buddhism didn't exist prior to him. You know, it was only after his insight that Buddhism came along. And so I also stated that, you know, he was a prince born from a king, and he was kind of sheltered away from the degradation of life, of people dying of sickness and so forth. They kind of hid it away from him. And as he grew older, he became aware of it uh, ever so slightly, to the point where he started hanging around with the yogis.
Right.
And this angered his father. And if you read the story of his life, this angered his father, who was a king, and said, but I can give this guy palaces. I can give him numerous beautiful women. Like, what is he doing? You know,
Right.
he's over here hanging out with yogis, practicing asceticism. And I said it in the under that Bodhi tree, when he finally got that insight, when he finally had his own mystical experience for himself, he realized that all the effort of the yogis with their asceticism was unnecessary. That all
Absolutely.
that was required was the relinquishing of the ego. And so if you really examine Buddhism, Alan Watts made this point. He said, if you really examine Buddhism, it's kind of an export of India. I'm sorry, of Hinduism. It's an export of Hinduism, in the sense that it takes the essentials of Hinduism. It doesn't take all these insane spiritual techniques of lying on the bed of spikes, of engaging in this in extreme fasting,
Right.
because he viewed that as unnecessary. And so that's why you have the Four Noble Truths. You know, so he got it down to the Eightfold Path, which is, you know, that he felt was the necessary way to approach nirvana or enlightenment, or what we might call today mystical experience.
Right.
And so he became then the founder of a major religion. He became the founder of Buddhism.
Mhm.
And so so it is said in the within the perennial philosophy that mystics, you know, they rediscover truths of the religion, because the religion has already been around. But if you trace a religion all the way back into its root, if you follow what this is saying directly, then the very origin of a religion is a byproduct of an individual having a mystical experience.
I would actually agree with that, but before I jump in, I'll
Okay.
put what Titan, what a couple of other individuals put inside chat. So Titan Uranus stated, and I agree. I argue that that's only because the underlying neurochemistry is the same, and that one can have a transcendent experience without recourse to narcotics at all, as I did. So that's what he states, and
Yeah,
also,
we addressed that in our last conversation.
and
Yeah.
that you can also do so while remaining cognizant that it is something purely physical happening in the brain. So I would completely agree with Titan on this, but the thing is that we did have this conversation beforehand, and you did say that people can be cognizant while having a religious experience and not necessarily within the realm of
Well, what he was saying is that I think while he's saying while remaining cognizant, of course, that I don't think that can necessarily happen during the experience, but I think what it means, like after you have this phenomenon occur, you can realize like, oh, okay, what happened to me was completely natural.
Right.
Because like the even like if you look into the neuroscience, I mentioned that they have a living room like setting. They set the volunteer on a couch, and they go through this experience. And the neuroscientists don't bother interviewing them while they have this experience. This is
Right.
impossible. Like they interview them afterwards. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, you can rationalize afterwards that oh, yeah, I had this phenomenon occur to me, and it's a completely natural phenomenon. I agree with that totally too, and so do the neuroscientists. They say that the mystical experience is a natural phenomenon within human beings. So and that it's been occurring since time immemorial.
Mhm.
It's been happening time and throughout all the world's cultures and religions, and through shamanism, to the earliest forms of our religion itself, which would be shamanism. Before Hinduism
Yeah,
got traction, before Buddhism got traction, there was shamanism. And but I think I've had discussions like this with atheists or materialists or naturalists, whatever you like to call it. And I think I once mentioned before that there's uh, the word supernatural is always invoked in these conversations.
absolutely.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people interpret supernatural to mean like something that defies the laws of physics, something that's, magic in some like, real sense of magic in this, that I don't mean like real, but like Peter Pan sense, like,
Right.
something again, going back to violating the laws of physics. And so I think there's a misconception there, I think, that a lot of people have, that to think of the mystical experience, because remember, we discussed the term itself, it has a lot of baggage. People, when they
Exactly.
hear mystical, they think airy fairy, they think nonsense, something that's, that can't happen. But that's definitely not what neuroscientists at Johns Hopkins or any university performing these studies are saying at all. They will flat out say that this is a very biologically normal phenomenon within human beings. um, so I
Right.
think that's a point to be made.
Oh no, I agree. This is just a joke, but Linear stated, I need to take the heroic dose so I can start my own religion. I will
Yeah,
start
I,
accepting
I, I think that would
donations
be
now.
hard today. Like I think the founders, there's a reason why the founders existed thousands of years ago. Like I think a lot of people have this experience nowadays. A lot of people have the heroic dose, and you don't
Hmm.
see you don't see thousands of religions forming, everywhere. If that was the case,
Well, I
um,
think because for me, now I might be completely wrong based on my assessment, but I think that when people talk about religions in and of themselves, I think people talk about cults, right? Like the origin of what religions hold to, in a sense. Because I think all religion starts off as cults, but only when they get enough adherents, then they're called religions. Then they become part of the natural conception of what a religion is. But in the beginning, they all start off as cults. And I think that when people state that, well, religions aren't popping up everywhere, it makes sense because it takes a long time for a cult to become a religion. It took Christianity quite some time for it to become a religion within Rome,
mhm.
in a sense. And we can even look at Islam, for instance, and it took less time, if we really look at it, but
Yeah,
also still some time for it to become a religion of what it is today.
yeah.
And
I mean, I can agree with that. The only issue I might have is, usually cult is used in a more criticizing
right,
fashion, like a put down almost. And even if you look into, like, we were talking about the Ellisonian mysteries,
Right.
it was a cult of some sort.
Yes.
And the knowledge that they revered was what they called esoteric. Esoteric meaning hidden knowledge.
Hmm.
And if it was hidden for any reason at all, there's many examples of mystics, including Christ himself, that when they start to make some splashes and waves, and Alan Watts would say, when someone has this occur to them, they can't help themselves but to speak about it. Terence McKenna said it a different way. He said, when someone takes DMT, they can't shut up about DMT. Like, in other words, it's in human nature to want to express it.
Right.
And that's because if you didn't, then you wouldn't become a founder of religion. Like, you
That
would
is
just keep
it.
it to yourself. And
Exactly.
so I think maybe one reason to keep it esoteric is the very reason all these mystics were killed. If you're trying to express a message of unity, of brotherhood, of love, that's where you got in trouble. And Bill Hicks, the comedian, he would say, look at Martin Luther King, look at JFK, or Alan Watts would say, he would point out the mystics throughout the ages. Look at Giordano Bruno, he was burned at the stake. There was a Sufi mystic that was also murdered. Hypatia, that the female philosopher, the Greek philosopher that I mentioned,
Yes,
she
he was
died a
murdered by Christians.
she died a horrible death. They
Oh,
they
big time.
dragged her along a horse carriage, and they took her to this religious building that was filled with like these plastered ornaments and plates and vessels and so forth. And they demolished the whole thing, and they got the shards, and they ripped her body to pieces with the shards.
Yeah.
And so I think if it's esoteric at all, it may be for a reason. It's because if it's, if you're too loud with that kind of content, it's going to be quieted somehow, as it is today. I mean, I think it's going on today.
But I think that that's the problem, though, right? Like when we look at esoteric knowledge, or let's just call it that, esoteric knowledge. The reason why it becomes heretical, in my, at least the way that I see it, in at least the way that it comes out through a lot of literature and stuff like that, is that it's not only that they are loud, but it's also because they are destructive. That's the whole entire point. If we look at, let's just say, Jesus, and some people said Jesus had some sort of quote unquote religious
Magical
experience.
powers.
Pardon?
No, say it again. I was trying to guess what you were going to say. Say that again.
Well, certain people
Jesus
state.
had
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
mystical state. Okay, go
Yeah,
ahead.
mystical state. And from that moment forward, because he had that mystical state, a certain individual's state, that he was much more louder, but not only just louder, but destructive of the other individuals around, because they weren't following God, for instance,
Yeah.
or the God that he had a revelation of. And henceforth, he was against money, for instance. He was against people with wealth. He was against money launder, and not money laundering, but like bank systems and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And that's the whole entire reason. Well, obviously, there's other people who, like mythicists, for instance, who say that Jesus didn't exist, and there's a lot of evidence to why Jesus didn't exist. Not just how could I say it? Amateurs trying to prove that Jesus didn't exist. There's a lot of information which is out there too, but that is besides the point. That's not what I'm trying to get to. The point is that if we take literature correctly and we look and say that he did have a mystical experience, then he was completely destructive to the individuals who were around him. And obviously, when individuals are destructive to people around them, they're going to start seeing them as not only just heretical, but also as somebody who needs to be
Shut down.
silenced.
Yeah.
you know. And I think that's the whole entire thing, is just that mystics in and of themselves is not just that they can't be silent, because people can just be like, oh, he's out of his mind, just let him keep babbling, he's going
Yeah.
insane. But the reality of the situation is that the mystic wants to change the environment that's around them, destroy what was there before in order to promote a new. And
Well,
that's something that I think mystics
yeah.
completely and
Well,
absolutely.
you mentioned, destroyed, but like, what are we destroying? Like, in other words, I think that I'll give a modern example.
Mm.
You probably have heard of Andrew Tate.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, right. Okay,
Yeah.
so a lot of people, when they hear the term Illuminati, they think tinfoil hats, and they start going off because it has a lot of baggage, that term in and of
Oh,
itself.
big time.
George, I love the way George Carlin put it. He didn't call them the Illuminati. He said the owners. The owners don't want you to know this. They want people just smart enough to run the machines, but to accept the smaller wages and increased hours and lack of benefits and so on and so forth. I think the struggle here is really power. What the mystic undermines is power. You know,
But
those that are in power.
yeah, I see what you're saying, but I also think the problem with the mystic as well is that the mystic doesn't realize, towards a certain extent, that power is an emergent construct. No matter what you try to do to try to disrupt it, it will pop up
Mhm.
eventually. And the thing is that for a mystic, they themselves might think that they're doing something for good, for instance, but they don't realize that the power in and of itself can be very flexible and can be used in order to abuse once again. And I think that's again the problem with the mystic, is that they themselves, even though that uh, they're not held by the power structure, they are in a sense creating a new foundation where that power structure can be reattributed to. And it seems that they've got all this knowledge of the universe somehow, but at the same time don't realize that one fact.
I can agree with that, but having this experience for myself, one thing
Okay,
we haven't mentioned yet is
sure.
uh, one thing I didn't touch on, because there is various factors to the mystical experience. When the neuroscientists at Johns Hopkins considered what's called the complete mystical experience, and
Okay.
I even have the 6 factors right here. I thought they were going to come up in the discussion, but they didn't. I don't
Uh,
know if you ever looked into them.
I did not. I did not.
Um,
So please.
the first one is the very primary one, and they consider these part of a factor one.
Mhm.
These are very necessary to deem that someone has had a mystical experience. And it's not as though like the volunteer comes out of the experience and they interview them afterwards.
Mhm.
When they interview, the first thing people say when they come out of this experience is, I can't possibly put that into words. So that's not enough for Johns Hopkins, the professionals, to write something down,
Right.
like, oh, you can't put this into words.
Good point.
So that's why William James emphasized ineffability, like incommunicable. It's something that can't be said. But give these volunteers a little bit time. So they do these follow up interviews, 14-month follow up. It's not like it's the session. The scientific session doesn't end at the end of the
Right.
experience. They follow up with these volunteers, and 14 months later they mold it over a little bit, and now they're able to say a little bit something about the experience. And so what their description, and I've told you before, some people might say something like, there was no way for me to tell where my body ended and the rest of the universe began.
Mm.
I was somehow able to perceive oneness in that point. They'll give descriptions like this. And so when they give descriptions like this, okay, now the professionals can, okay, now I can assess where you're at with this. You had this experience. So that sounds like the non-duality this is the main primary factor of the complete mystical experience, unity, the interconnectedness of all people and things, or they call pure consciousness. The breakdown of the subject object dichotomy. Like you can no longer, there's no subjective self to assess between an objective reality. It's all one. And so the next one is a sacredness or reverence. They people, when they have this experience, they feel like it's not something that's sinful or blasphemous in any sense. It seems to be like a grand sacredness, like if they're standing before a majesty, before God. I know that depicts a kind of dualistic statement, but I'm trying to be metaphoric here.
No, I get you.
Yeah.
I get you. It's the feeling. It's the symbolic feeling.
Yeah, the symbolic feeling. And so
something that is higher than
exactly.
Okay.
And the next one is of course the noetic quality that we spoke of. Another thing people will say is that this experience was more real than ordinary consciousness.
Right.
And I gave you the example last time of you no longer, like if we considered the block universe, for instance, you're no longer an actor within the block. Your identity is not the egoic or materialistic body within that plays a role within that block. You're the entire block itself. So your identity is not placed in the material body, it's now placed in the block. This same sense of this unity that's expressed by that first factor. The next one is deeply felt positive mood, universal love, joy, or peace. This is one that we haven't touched on. When I felt this, it was I couldn't look in the dictionary for any word except for the religious vocabulary of maybe Christianity when they talk about agape, this infinite, unconditional love for all people and things. So the mystic speaks from that vantage point, from having this non-judgmental, infinite love for everyone and every species. That's why the Jains couldn't even harvest potatoes, because they feared harming insects.
Right.
Because they had a huge love for all of life, huge reverence. The next one is the one I mentioned before, was the transcendence of space and time. Right. I said that some volunteers will say this in various different ways. They'll say, it felt as though I saw beyond dimensionality, or was fourth dimensional, or all time froze, or, they'll find some way to articulate this. Right. And then, of course, the last one is ineffability. That's the one that they see when someone first comes out of it. They can't put it into words. Yeah, they can't say what it is. You saw some vision that was so beyond anything you could ever describe. But like I said, you give someone a few months to mull it over, and they'll be able to say a little bit about it, but their words, it's one thing to hear the collapse of the subject object dichotomy. It's quite another thing to experience it for yourself. Right. And so, the point in bringing up all this is that, I don't think the mystic necessarily means to be destructive in any fashion. And maybe it was. I think Christ, whatever influence he may lay on the world, it could be up to debate whether it was good for bad or bad. I don't know if you've ever heard the story of the Chinese farmer.
Sounds familiar, but please go ahead with it.
It's an interesting story. It's so there's this Chinese farmer. It's an old Chinese story. I don't know how far it dates back, but so he has he lives on a farm with his family, and there's wild horses on the horizon, right? And so he asked one of his sons to go tame one of those horses so they can use it for the farm. So his son goes on the horse, and he ends up breaking his arm, and the farmer goes, maybe. And so the next day, generals come to recruit young men for the military, and they can't take his son because he has a broken arm. And so the farmers go. The farmer says maybe, and and it goes on and on to mention these things where you can't tell whether it's ultimately good or ultimately bad. That's the point of the story. And so, like, I think the same idea is met with Christianity. You know, we don't know whether it's ultimately a force on this planet for good or bad. And there's some people who, quit drug addiction or because they say they were saved by Christ. But at the same time, there's other fundamentalists that kill people in the name of the Christian God.
That is very true.
Yeah. So
But
it's
I
like
think
it's a
too,
double-edged sword.
right, but I think too it's also the destructive force of what is put within its tenants, right? Like if you're looking at its tenants and it has good prospects, let's just say, of how to treat one's wife. Let's just say how to treat one's wife, but then after it's like, but slavery, now that's
Yeah.
okay. We got, well, now we have two conflicting things. It's like, okay, well, it's stating, let's just say in Joshism, let's
Mhm.
just use that,
Sure.
that be nice to one's wife, always be caring, always listen, always like don't put your opinion higher than hers and everything. People are like, wow, that's actually really freaking good. I think I want to jump into that.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden I'm like, but you're allowed to hold slaves and you can whip them towards the edge of their life. You can't kill them, but if they
Yeah.
misbehave, you can beat them
Yeah.
severely.
Mm.
Now we slowly but surely run into a problem where it's like, okay, there's a dichotomy here. There's something that's not holding up because Josh
I
is,
see what you're saying. Yeah,
yeah,
I can get that. I've looked into to that very deeply myself, and the only thing I can come up with is that if you actually look into the history of slavery,
mm,
it was a major reality of the time of the OT.
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean they existed everywhere. It was almost a natural part of the culture.
It was. It
Yeah.
was a natural part of the world at that time.
Mhm.
Like there
Yeah,
wasn't
every culture had
place for you
slaves
to go.
during that time. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of how they got things done. In a way, I mean, this is just an aside, but in a way,
No,
you can kind of see modern culture, wage slavery. Some people call it, like the people who build the highways and all that, and it's all ran by, of course, monumental power at the above pays millions of dollars to get a highway made in your town, and that might be a subtle modern form of what existed back then. The way I see religion kind of interpenetrating that situation there, you mentioned like beating the slaves unto right before they die, right? I think if it weren't for that religious entry, like imagine if that religious entry wasn't there, that there was no doctrine on how bad you could beat slaves, then obviously slaves maybe would be beaten unto death. And so like so religion kind of acted as a way to assuage that culture and situation at that time.
a-
And
absolutely. But
yeah.
I think the problem though, Cafe, is that these individuals who are supposed to be mystics who've
I don't
written,
think it was necessarily the mystics that were, waging slavery on humanity, though. I guess that's the distinction I was trying to make. That,
oh, okay, okay.
yeah, like if you're speaking from unconditional love, obviously there would be no slavery, But I think the situation is far more dynamic and complex than that. I don't think we can attribute slavery to mystics. Um,
But
I, I,
but
yeah,
wouldn't you say though that if most religions are created by mystics, and
yeah,
let's just say that the literature in and of itself has certain mystic influences in it,
sure.
then wouldn't wouldn't there be somebody who was out there that would speak out against such um um atrocities in a sense? But it seems that because it was the normal extent of society, that the mystics just thought that it was normal, that it wasn't like anything to be fought against in a sense.
I definitely hear you, man, and I think from my own studies into comparative religion, I think that's kind of seen it very black and white. I'll give an example. Um, uh, Even within the story of the perennial philosophy,
Okay.
you have a certain mystic that will come along and renew the spirituality within various religions. So you'll have, I think what happens is that yes, you'll have a mystic that founds a religion, and of course this mystic only has a lifetime to live. He'll die, and you'll have this religion practiced by tradition for hundreds, maybe even a thousand years. And you'll have I think what eventually happens is people kind of lose trace of the original message. And this happens all the time, and even in your own life, you might, like, you had an influence then, like, oh, I'm very passionate now to do this and do that, and you'll see it slowly dissipate.
Oh,
and
big time,
and,
big time.
and then you'll have something like, and then you'll find something like, oh, this totally renewed my passion for this, and I remember my ways. I was slowly losing my ways, and now I'm found again. And so that's kind of like a microcosm of what occurs within, I think, a religion. Like I think religions, like, that's why I think you see religions bifurcate and themselves into various sects. So now you have a Protestantism, a Catholicism, Presbyterianism. You know
Right.
what I mean? Yes, because along the way there's something called eisegesis. Theologians reading into the text, being
Yes.
biased, having their own interpretation of what they think should be the right way to do this and that. And so when let's say someone along the way finally has a mystical experience, they kind of revive the tradition. They revive it to what it once held at its original point. And so that's something to consider, because
I would definitely consider that.
yeah, that we can't necessarily say that at this point the mystic had the original message and it was kept for this long for people who weren't even having mystical experiences. In other words, that I think the reason that Jains were so reverent towards life is because the mystical tradition was emphasized. You know what I mean? In other words, it was more emphasized than perhaps any other religion. They made it more the point than any other religion, even though it is the point. And all Christianity says, the direct revelation of the Holy Spirit. Do that and then decide what you want to do. Same thing with Buddhism. Have nirvana before you decide on anything. And all the religions have a word for this experience. But, we're talking about vast spans of time where, yes, the message can be forgotten. And there could be misinterpretations, there could be mistranslations and so forth. In other words, I'm trying to say that you can't really pinpoint it black and white. There is a dynamic and complex process happening here.
Oh, I completely agree. But the thing, well, before I continue, I just want to put what's on the
Sure.
thing. So Titan states, understand that the big part of my problem is that it could cause people not able to take part in such studies to do amateur hour recreational drugs and harm themselves. So I would agree with that, what Titan stated.
Well, I mean, when people, usually talk about recreational experience, the recreational is a term that relates to low doses. Like I'm just taking this for recreation, for fun. So when you take a low dose, you want to be able to attend the concert, you want to be able to attend the party,
Right.
and still be able to walk around and talk to people and have fun. But on these higher doses, none of that is possible. The ego is gone there. Where is the ego to be able to have a conversation with someone else? And so, with the higher doses, that's why set and setting are so important.
Mhm.
Because you don't want to be in a concert setting, you don't want to be in a party, you don't want to take these things in the middle of downtown, because you're going to be completely immobilized. And I think a lot of people miss that point. And I think it's because a lot of people haven't had a heroic dose. A lot of people are afraid to have it because they don't want to lose sense of control. They don't want to lose sense of their ego, because it really is akin to dying. It's like, would you be willing to die right now? You know, like it's almost saying the same exact thing, because the same thing's going to happen. In death, you lose your sense of self. And in this experience, you lose your sense of self. You know, and I think that's why a lot of people are afraid to do it, because the same fear that people have of dying is the same fear people have of taking a heroic dose. It's the exact same fear.
Also, Linear, I do want to thank you. If you like the stream, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Thank you very much. Now, what he also says, it's more real based on what you stated beforehand about being part of the block and everything like that. And he states that, it's more real, the experience. You're all there and reduced to a singularity of the experience. So he's gone and has done this, and this is his experience as well. So he's in agreement.
He also says it's also too brief. I would question whether he took DMT to do it, because DMT is, like 10 minutes. Whereas if you do it a heroic dose of mushrooms, you're looking at like 6 to 9 hours. Yeah. If you do a heroic dose of LSD, you're looking at about 3 days. So where is this all too brief? Like it really depends on what you're taking right there.
Yeah. So Titan, if you want to answer that, go ahead, and I'll bring it up on the comment section. And also, he says we can look at it objectively and assess the benefits versus the harms and decide we can do without it. So I guess he was talking about the religion conversation that we were having before, based on how do we know when it comes to bad things, like if Christianity did something that was good or bad. How do we know for sure? And I think that he's taking that apart and just stating that, well, we can objectively assess the benefits and the harms. And from there, we can say that we can do without something, or we can bring it in and accept it as.
I can add to that. If you, this is one perspective that I've come to, is that, there's a lot of fundamentalist Christians out there that will pedestalize Christ and say that he was only God and no one else. I don't know if you recall, but on our last discussion that we had the first time, I was quoting out of John. I started with John 10:30, where he says, "I and the Father are one." Right. And in that specific passage, the Jews pick up a stone and stone Christ. And he says, "For all these good works I've done, for which do you stone me?" And he says, "I stone you not for your good works, but for you being a man, you call yourself God." And then he continues to quote in John 10:34, the 82nd Psalm. He says, "Isn't it not written in your books? I said, ye are gods," calling everyone else gods. And I was trying to make the point that he didn't see it solely in himself. But yet a lot of Christians will say that, no, only Christ is God, even though Christ himself didn't consider him solely God. And my point with that is, if you pedestalize Christ as a fundamentalist Christian, then you're only going to see Christianity as correct and no other religion. And so the perennialist, or I would even say the mystic, because if you look at the perennial philosophy, it goes back thousands of years. It has roots in Neoplatonism. Right. And so the mystic is someone who has this phenomenon occur, the mystical experience, or whatever language they use in their religion to describe it. They'll have it. And when they have it, a lot of these mystics did see beyond their own religion. They saw that, wow, this is not exclusive to me or my religion. This is something that all the mystics have discovered throughout all the religions. That's why Meister Eckhart says the theologians may quarrel, but the mystics of the world speak the same language. So they all saw this as an insight that doesn't belong to one sole religion. So that's why the perennial philosophy argues that there is a metaphysical truth. And notice that they say metaphysical truth. They don't say God.
Right.
because they realize that language is diverse throughout time. I was talking about the etymology of the word God, and
Right.
the history. How far does that word go? Do you know? Like I've looked into it. It has a Germanic root, and there's also speculation that it may have been um, a, a, a abbreviation for Gautama, the original Buddha. Gautama becomes Gaut and becomes God. So but you can trace it back there, but of course you can't trace it back further. So the Hindus obviously never used the word God because it didn't exist then.
Hmm.
They existed 10,000 years before the Buddha came along, and so they didn't say God, they said Brahman. That's how they refer to the divine. And so when you examine the perennial philosophy, it says it's a universal core, it's a universal metaphysical truth that all these world religions are recognizing. And so when you see it that way, you no longer hold one religion true over another. You see the core truth expressed in all of them, which resembles a unity, a harmony, a love between all. It would unite humanity, not separate it. Because if you see one religion as true over another, then you automatically and necessarily put yourself in a divisiveness. You put yourself against other religions. Now you have to fight them. Now you're against them. Now you have to wage war. Now you have to kill people. You know, so
Absolutely.
yeah. So
Absolutely.
I really see with Johns Hopkins. The reason I hold high regard to these professionals out there is because I really think they're doing something that will ultimately unite humanity.
I, for me, well, before I delve in, Titan answered your question beforehand about how he reached that state of unity. He said, I use meditation, no narcotics at all. It is entirely possible to enter the state described without drugs.
I agree. I like I said, I practice Advaita Vedanta, and that's the whole goal is to get there without the aid of psychedelics, And I definitely think it's possible. The thing is, my criticism towards that is that I this is another thing I mentioned before in our first discussion. I
Right.
said if you look at the chemical structure of psilocybin, the hexagonal pictures that you see of the chemical structures, and you see DMT, they almost have a stencil like congruency over another. They're almost the same compound with a few markers outside of it on psilocybin. DMT is a more simple molecule than psilocybin, or psilocin. Psilocin. So you don't necessarily experience psilocybin when you take it. When it passes the blood-brain barrier, it becomes psilocin, an even more simple compound. And
Mm.
if you take the structure of psilocin and you compare it to DMT, they're almost twin-like. And so my argument would be towards people who claim this through meditation is that remember what I was telling you about the pineal gland. If
Right.
that's the source of DMT, then there's only so much you can get out of it. And if you've bombarded your body with chemicals that destroy your potential there, then psychedelics almost become the only recourse to it. Whereas we were talking about in speculation a long time ago, where it was walnut size. The pineal gland was instead of being pea sized the way it is today. If it was walnut sized during the times of the yogis who lived, 10,000 BC, then it's very possible that they could have entered these states naturally. I think it was probably maybe even possible for Christ too. Um, Perhaps he entered some sort of contemplative state where he achieved it naturally. If Titan is saying that he can reach these states naturally, then you would also have to practice a regimen of diet where you only drink pure water, you don't drink faucet water, where you only eat foods that would enhance your natural ability to do this. You stay away from meats. You have to have a very strict, almost even vegan, diet to be able to claim such things. I think.
No, I mean, I understand that individuals, and that's the number one thing too. Like, my statement is never to state that a person isn't having an experience. The person is having an experience, and that experience is very vivid for themselves. And I think
Mhm.
that's the one thing that is very difficult to state to an individual. And I think nobody has a right to say that, well, your experience isn't real or whatever. Because just like with a person who's going through other personal experiences, such as, let's just say, a person, I'm not trying to connect the two, by the way, I'm not stating that either, but it's just something that came to mind. It's kind of like when somebody states, who has schizophrenia for instance,
Yeah.
states that they're hearing voices inside
Mhm.
their heads. You can say, no, you're not hearing voices, everything is okay, and there's nobody around you, so don't try not to worry about it, and here's medication to try to lower those occurrences. But to them, they're as real as hearing you or me, and that's the thing, is that if the brain can already do that through hearing voices, such as the individuals who are schizophrenic, or see things that are not physically there in a
Yeah.
sense. And then obviously for me, I think that the circumstance and the situation would be, well, if somebody's underneath the influence of drugs, or if somebody puts themselves through a rigorous meditation, let's just say, that they can also have an experience of oneness. But I think, just like how the Titan stated and everything like that, and I think that you've also stated, is that you need to have the right intent, you need to have the right setting, and you need to have the right set in order for you to have these experiences. If you are, let's just say, not mentally there, for instance, meeting not like a person who's mentally ill, I'm just saying that you yourself aren't mentally there. You yourself are kind of tired that day, or whatever the situation is, and you haven't built yourself up to that extent yet, then you're not going to have the same experience as somebody who has rigorously, prepared themselves for that. So I think that the extent is that at first, through intent, you kind of create the environment already for yourself. Because I think, just like how I look at it, I think the subconscious and the conscious kind of meld together, and the subconscious, in my opinion, holds the information that is needed. And that's why sometimes when you think of something, or you smell something and it brings back a vivid memory, that's the subconscious being like, oh shit, I remember that, bang. And now you have that experience. And I think that with consciousness and the unconscious working together, and just like how you stated, that barrier that's there now becomes very fragile, so that the consciousness can still feel at first like it's in control, and then falls into the subconscious, and now it's no longer in control, but you're still conscious. It's the same as that thing as the experiences that people feel. I forget what the hell it's called, but when you're sleeping, sleep paralysis,
Yeah.
and I think it's the same exact situation. I think it's kind of like sleep paralysis, but while you're not asleep, in a sense, you're in a hallucinogenic paralysis that brings you forth on this journey. But I'll let you reply to that, and then Titan brought some really good and interesting comments in the comments section. But I would just
Sure.
want to hear
I
what
can
you.
address it. Well, I was talking about, this speculatory aspect of, trying to invoke this naturally. I'll go into the neuroscience a little bit, something that's
Sure, of course.
established. So they ran a study at Johns Hopkins with experienced meditators.
Mhm.
And I actually called in to try to volunteer for this study. I was rejected by the screener. Because I guess they were looking for people who actually took time out of their day to, like, literally sit in a posture and meditate. And I told him that the only time I meditate is when I'm laying down in bed, that when you're about to go to sleep. And
Right.
so they weren't looking for that, so, but they got experienced meditators who were comparing their meditation, their experience of so-called mystical experience with a high dose of psilocybin.
Right.
And virtually every single volunteer in this study said that the psychedelic produced a more profound mystical experience than what they've achieved with their meditation. But none of them came back saying like, now I'm going to switch my method. I'm going to start taking psychedelics now. And, this is my meditative practice now. They actually said, that was an interesting experience, and I want to be able to achieve that through my meditation. So they continued on with the meditation, but then now they had a focal point. Like now they knew where they had to get to compared to where they were at their current state, even though these were all experienced meditators. So yeah, that's a very interesting study out of Johns Hopkins. It's been peer reviewed. You can look it up online. You can Google, run a Google.
We'll definitely do that.
And find it.
Yeah.
Another thing you brought up was schizophrenia. Yes, people hear voices. And like I said, when I was speaking of the archetypal visionary aspect of the experience, the archetypal visionary aspect that these professionals speak on are still occurring in what I was referring to as this subject-object dichotomy.
Right.
Like I'm hearing voices. This is happening to me. There are, this is another area of speculation, but there is speculation that people who are diagnosed quote unquote schizophrenic are actually people who've had mystical experiences. It's just that psychology during the time didn't have the neuroscience that they have now, that they're actually studying this phenomenon. They didn't know how to categorize it. So we just put them off in the category of these people are schizophrenic. These people, they're unfit for our society. They need medicine. They have to be helped somehow. They're not psychologically fit. Terence McKenna made this point that if you had a schizophrenic in a shamanic society, they wouldn't be regarded as someone unfit to hold a job, unfit to, hold a conversation, so on and so forth. They would be taken under the tutelage of master shaman, and they would be potentially the next shaman to lead the way for the culture and society itself.
Yeah, but I think because my dad used to have a friend that was very schizophrenic in a sense. And what ended up happening was that he couldn't even ride a bus without his meds because he thought everybody was thinking bad about him. He thought that everybody already knew that he was schizophrenic. He thought that everybody, and that's the huge problem. And even though that, just like how you stated, even individuals with seizures, for instance, could be looked at as somebody who's having a religious experience. And actually there's a case study that people who do have seizures have a higher ability of being religious than normal individuals. But that again kind of shows me that it's more of a neurological process rather than something that is kind of like
the point,
well, not divinely, I shouldn't say divinely, but something that is coming from like an ultimate consciousness down to you in a sense.
Well, the point I was trying to make with that is that, okay, we were talking about how earlier, if you don't have any like religious background and or any knowledge of these the types of techniques that shamans use to kind of defend themselves towards mystical experience, that it's very possible to go into ego inflation. You may believe that the insight is only imparted to you and no one else, that it's something happening to you. In the very same way, the schizophrenic in our society, the point I was trying to make with that is that in our society, schizophrenics are told things like, you can't hold a job, you're unfit for society. They're bombarded with these statements. So if you live in a society where you're being diminished all the time, then you're going to end up on a bus where you're going to think everyone else is thinking you're crazy. Whereas, well, the point I was trying to make with the shamanic society, if you have it in a shamanic society, you're going to be regarded as divine. You're going to be upheld. You're going to be taken under the tutelage of master shaman. You know, you're not going to end up on a bus where everyone thinks you're nuts.
Right, but that's but I'll continue on that afterwards because Titan did add some really good stuff. So I just want to.
No, I've been reading his stuff, man, and some of it is misinformed. Like he tried to say that DMT wasn't found in humans. That's incorrect.
Well, right here, yeah, it's not even certain that pineal gland produces DMT.
That I don't know how far back research he's looking into, but I like I said, I keep up with this stuff. You know, like I follow this stuff very closely, man. And the more recent studies, I think there was one done in 2014, where yes, they confirmed that it was being elaborated in rodents in the pineal gland. And the reason they study rodents is because they're very close to, you know, human beings. You know, we're not too in the way we're not too far off from chimpanzees. You know, we're related to the rodent, and so it's while they haven't tested it exactly, they hadn't done the same exact test on these rodents on human beings because there's ethical issues there. It's very likely to say that yes, I mean DMT is being elaborated in the pineal gland of the human being. They found he said they found there's been trace amounts in the lungs, there's been trace amounts in the body, but another point to make about DMT is it's quickly metabolized. That's why you can vape DMT and it only lasts 10 minutes. You know, the body knows exactly what to do with it. You know, it's the quickest yet the most profound psychedelic experience you can have. Whereas I told you these other compounds like LSD or psilocybin, while even psilocin that we mentioned is very close in structure to DMT, it does have a few not a full hexagon, but it has markers outside of DMT that make it obviously longer to metabolize in the human body.
Big time. But I think too, the thing that, again, I think that's another thing that we kind of look at. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not somebody who's a professional at this, and definitely DMT amounts within the brain or the pineal gland or anything. In general, but I am trying to state that because just like how you stated, DMT and psilocybin, I think it's called psilocybin.
Psilocybin is the compound inside the psilocybin mushroom, like right. I mean the psychedelic mushroom. Psilocin is the compound that it breaks down to after it passes the blood-brain barrier. But both psilocin and psilocybin can be found in the magic mushroom. They both occur.
Right. But you stated that they kind of map.
Yeah, the psilocin. So psilocybin is not what you're actually tripping on. It's actually this. I'm sorry, psilocybin is not what you're actually tripping on. It's the psilocin, because once it passes the blood-brain barrier, it's broken down into psilocin. Psilocin is the one that maps over like a twin-like over DMT.
Right, but I think that's also what certain people would say is that yes, there can be certain mappings between psilocin and DMT, but at the same exact time, those actual distinct differences that are there make it almost a completely different compound in a sense.
No, I mean it is in that sense. I totally agree. I mean that's why we call it psilocin and not DMT. You know, they're not the same compound. Yeah.
Right. But I'm just saying that because of that, it can now have a different effect than what we claim that, let's just say, DMT does and everything like that, and hence because I heard you say that. Because of within the brain, in a sense, there seems to be that same compound too. And I believe that it was, you stated that it was the pineal gland. Please forgive me if I'm not.
Not DMT you're talking about. Well, I mean, what I've heard Terrence say, because I've never tried DMT.
Mm,
I've tried mushrooms at a high dose, but I haven't had the opportunity to try DMT only because I haven't come across it yet. It would have been already done if I had access to it, but I currently don't have any access. But
right.
um, uh, I've heard Terrence McKenna say, and he has towards the end of his life, he said he had about 90 trips with DMT. So he had extensive experience with DMT. And he had also extensive experience with mushrooms. And he would say that if you raise the dose high enough with mushrooms, you're
Mhm.
going to get to a place where the hallucinatory phenomenon that occurs with DMT and psilocybin are virtually identical. There's no distinction between the two.
Right.
So I think they do ultimately have the same effect. Uh, um, uh, I'm going based off Terrence. He saw it as a bullseye. So on the outer part of the bullseye,
Mhm.
you might have mescaline, you might have LSD, and as you get closer, you're gonna have psilocybin, and then at the very center of the bullseye, you're gonna have DMT. And so if you in other words, if you raise the dose of any one of these psychedelics, you're going to get to the DMT vision, essentially, what he called the DMT flash.
Ah, okay, cool. So Titan also stated that the human pineal gland weighs 2 grams and would need to be capable of rapidly producing 25 milligrams to cause the psychedelic effect
Yeah,
at all.
this kind of goes back to what we were talking about, the speculation between why is it that a pea size now when it was supposedly a walnut size in our earlier part of our evolution,
Hmm.
So I that's why I said I don't want to sound Illuminati-esque, but we kind of live in
Uh-oh.
a society that hinders our natural ability for this. Like, why do you think fluoride's in the water? You think it's just for your teeth? Like, um,
Right.
yeah, you have to really question that. And it's not, like I said, it's not just the fluoride in the water. You bathe in that. You can avoid it all you want. You can drink pure water, going through osmosis and so forth, but you're still gonna have to bathe in it. You're still gonna brush your teeth with it. You're still going to eat foods out of a can. You're still going to chew on gum that contains aspartame. All these chemicals are detrimental towards your pineal gland. And
Right, but I think the one thing that people would state is that do we know how much one needs to ingest in order for it to have that kind of effect, right? Because there's a safe amount that you can take that
yeah,
wouldn't have any effect
well,
at all,
no, I
and that is
think
unconscious.
we're not talking about taking toxic doses of fluoride. We're talking about being kind of conditioned. You know what I mean? So, like, if you drink a glass of fluoride water every day for 30 years, this is going to have a very heavy toxic effect on your pineal gland.
Hmm.
So it's not really about toxicity here. It's about kind of slow
Duration of time.
conditioning.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a kind of subtle diminishing towards your natural ability to have this experience.
Interesting. Titan also stated monomin oxidase breaks DMT down very quickly so it doesn't accumulate. So that's I guess that's one of the what the
Well, I
body.
mean, I don't mean to criticize him, man, but there's been studies that would, completely, contradict everything he's saying here. Like, they've, you can look it up yourself if you don't believe me. Look up the effects of drinking water, of drinking a cup of faucet water every day for 30 years. Look at they've have pictures of pineal glands, man, of people who've died, and they've got to examine them, and how calcified they are.
Hmm,
There is obvious. There's no denying that there's an obvious detrimental effect at this point. There's too much science against what he's saying.
okay. The Titan also states that also and finally INMT, the enzyme that is required to produce DMT, is found in the lungs, heart, adrenals, pancreas, lymph nodes, and
Yes.
thyroid, because it is also used for other things.
Yes, and that same enzyme is also found in the pineal gland. He failed to point that out. So you know what I mean. So the enzyme that will cause a certain chemical structure to be synthesized to DMT is also present in the pineal gland.
Hmm. He also Titan also states that phenotypal schizophrenia is a genetic disorder that causes degenerative brain damage. So I guess that was with our conversation with
Yeah,
schizophrenia.
in my opinion, there's not enough studies on schizophrenia. It's still a phenomenon as misunderstood as consciousness itself. And there is a lot established with it. I don't want to detract it, but I don't think we can definitively make statements that whether this is whether the speculation that schizophrenic people are people that may be having mystical experiences. Like I don't think we can definitively say that yet.
Right, but I think that that's where we might run into problems then, because if that is the case, and just like how you stated, if we look at things more mystical and we do take these individuals underneath a mystic's wing, for instance, we don't know, let's just say, what type of aspect will come out from that. And
Yeah,
we have
that,
had leaders
that
that
would be an
had
interesting study.
it
Yeah,
would, but again, we just don't know, and just like
I
how
agree. Like earlier, what we were saying, like the when we spoke of the psychedelic renaissance, that term refers to all the scientific studies that are blowing up all over the world, not just at Johns Hopkins. I mean, I've been focusing at Johns Hopkins because that was kind of the catalyst.
Hmm.
It was Roland Griffiths that prompted this worldwide endeavor for these scientific studies. They're now happening everywhere. They're happening in the UK, California. I think there's even a place in Utah, New Mexico. They're going on all over the world now, and that's what that psychedelic renaissance term is referring to. The blowing up of all this scientific research relative to psychedelics and trying to understand consciousness, trying to understand mystical experience, you know. And I think that's why it's becoming. I don't know if you read articles where it's becoming more legalized at the same rate as cannabis is becoming more and more legalized.
Well, that's the thing that I have read, and I have read that the certain accounts for, let's just say, psilocybin and stuff like that, and people ingesting it at high doses if they have depression and other things like that, does actually help them and does help their outlook. But at the same time, I cannot go, and just through the understanding of looking at individuals who have had seizures and individuals who have had schizophrenia and everything like that, I cannot state that these how could I say it, these events in a sense, or these type of illnesses are something that are equated to some kind of mystical experience. I think that it is a misfiring of the brain. And it seems to be that way with more evidence that are coming out about seizures and about uh, what the heck is the other one? Schizophrenia.
Yeah, I mean, well, the same criticism is made towards has been made towards mystical experience. Like, have you ever heard of Jill Bolt Taylor? Um, she was she had a stroke, and she wrote a book called The Stroke of Insight,
Mm.
because her stroke caused her to have an experience where she started relating towards the writings of mystics and their mystical experience. She couldn't distinguish what she experienced from the mystical experience, and it's very possible to have it through a stroke. There's many ways this experience can be induced. It's not just taking psychedelics. It's not just meditation. It's it's near death experience. It's stroke. There's probably many facets and many ways that we haven't, that are undiscovered. And I think the more we study this phenomenon, the more neuroscience engages in this research,
Absolutely.
we're going to light up these areas of discussion that we're having right now. and have answers to these type of questions that you're that are lingering in your mind.
Absolutely. But I think because it's true, it is getting kind of late right now, and I don't want to keep you up, and I don't want to keep our awesome viewers up, nor do I want to overdo our time right now because I'm loving the conversation. It's just that at this moment, it is heading towards 1 o'clock.
No, full
So
respect, man. I love your due diligence towards the promptness of time, man. So yeah, carry on.
no, absolutely. But I think that Titan has really shot forth some really good questions that are out there and really good statements when it comes to these things, and let alone pineal gland and psilocybin. Like, I think that what people should do is delve into the research. And if there's anything that you know of, send it my way. If Titan, if there's anything that you know of, send it my way. I'll do my own research as well, and we can finally come and look and see if this is something that is just how could I say it? If either one side or the other is biased, or if there's some sort of like in between, you
Sure.
know? And I think that that would be really cool to really delve into, because I think that Titan really brought up some really good points. I think that you yourself have brought up some really good points when you were talking about mystical experiences and everything like that. And I just think that all in all, we can really break down that barrier and really look at what is truly what we're really looking at and what kind of experiences these are, and if these experiences really are something that is beyond our conscious minds, or if it's just our minds just within a natural phenomenon, within a natural state, when you finally breach that barrier with the unconscious and everything like that. So I think is going to be really cool. Thank you for coming on, Kafei. I really do appreciate it. Titan, thank you so much for sending these awesome questions and everything like that. And not only just questions, but also comments. I think that these are really good. Pushback is always necessary on any ideas. So I think that was fantastic. And again, thank you everybody for showing up. If you like our content, please smack that like and subscribe button. And also, before we leave, Kafei, is there anything that you want to state to our viewers before we end?
Sure. This has always been my effort in speaking with those who identify with atheism and agnosticism and so forth, to try to bring a melding of the dialogue. As you said, it's one reason I decided to speak to you.
Of
And
course.
I've known Titan for a good while. We've been in chat rooms plenty of times, and we've discussed this stuff. But I don't want to criticize the guy. I'm not so sure if he just ran to Google and pulled up the study, but a lot of the studies that I will link you to are
Mhm.
not things I just randomly Googled. They're things that I've went into very deeply myself. And like I said, I followed this stuff very closely. I would love to have another conversation with you, maybe sometime down the road
Of
when maybe
course.
you can examine this stuff for yourself and you take everything I said today and look it up for yourself. And that's one thing I always tell people: look into the actual research. When I called Matt Hunty, he was admittedly unfamiliar with the research, and I said, "Man, well, why don't you look into it?" So I waited about a year, and I called him again, and like, "Hey, man, did you ever look into it?" No, he didn't, man. So, you know,
Oh,
uh,
absolutely. I think that just like how I stated beforehand, individuals shouldn't just say that an experience isn't happening, or an experience is kind of like some sort of delusion which is there, because even just like how Titans stated, he himself had he had mystical, or had experiences that were in tandem with mystical experiences. And Titan is an atheist as well, or agnostic. I think he's an atheist. And from that point, please, time, I do forgive me, please. It is late at night. But when we really look at the circumstances, I do think that people do have experiences, but the reality is that what are the verticality of those experiences? And if we really look at the verticality of the experience, we slowly but surely start to see that they're predominantly psychological in mind frame rather than some sort of external type of encounters in a sense. And now, don't get me wrong, I'm not somebody who's just going to close my mind to this and be like, no, what you're saying is absolutely ridiculous. For me, I want to take as much evidence as I possibly can and see what is there and what is not. That's why I've reformed even the way that I encountered this conversation from the last conversation we had, in a sense, in order to kind of look into it more and to really see what the effects really are. And if these effects are something that are negative or not negative. And that's why, for me, I'm not
Yeah.
somebody who's
Well,
like,
the only thing I would add to that is that, I when you say external, um, the way I'll quote one of my favorite philosophers, Alan Watts. Um, he spoke of the yin yang, right?
right,
And so you have this symbol that has this dualistic representation of, the what kind of looks like a fish eating another fish. It's white and black. And so,
right.
like, if you consider the mystical experience to be something solely happening to you, it's almost as though you're recognizing the yin without the yang. And so, the point of a mystical experience, according to Alan Watts, was to recognize your fundamental unity with nature. And so, it's not necessarily like the black part of the yin is not looking at the white part of the yin, saying like, oh, this is some kind of Mortal Kombat realm. This is something, supernatural. It's trying to show our unity with nature itself. And so the point is, that's why these mystics invoke, peace, harmony, love, the golden rule of treat others as you would treat yourself. I think that's more the point of where mystics and the mystical experience is getting at. It's not trying to invoke some kind of supernatural nonsense as an atheist might criticize.
Oh no, I definitely think that what, like, when we look at a mystical experience or these type of experiences, I think the only thing that would lead somebody to be more questioning is when we start adding to like a greater consciousness, something that is outside of oneself, something that is more than oneself, that actually has a state of quote unquote existence.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
where I think
no,
we run.
I absolutely agree, and I see, and I wouldn't do that. I think that's where we're attacking like almost a ghost or a straw man in doing that, because that's definitely not the way I would put it.
Right.
Yeah, I see it more almost. I wouldn't call myself a naturalist or a materialist, but I do see it in the sense of that it's we're not necessarily trying to invoke something for lack of of a better word, supernatural here.
Oh
Um,
no, absolutely. And I think, like, if we are looking at something when we're talking about religious experiences, not religious, sorry, mystical experiences, and you're stating that there's some sort of, as I stated, there's, yes, we're having an experience, but I'm not saying that it's some sort of like religious experience or anything like that. I can kind of get onto that bus. When I start getting off the bus is where people are trying to then be like, well, that's why a deity actually exists. And then
that's
I'm like,
Man, that's
eee,
one thing I didn't get to address here, but I don't know. Maybe we can hold it for another conversation.
of
But
course.
um, the word deity, I've always kind of seen it as a red flag. In other words, like when someone says the word deity, it almost invariably invokes the entity form of God, the anthropomorphic. One example I like to use is that you mentioned Greco-Roman times, right?
Right.
I don't know if you ever studied Greek philosophy, but in the times of Greece, the average common folk did believe in Zeus. They did believe in Zeus and his offspring, so that you have, the one major god Zeus, and you have all the archetypes that follow Beelzebub, like Nemesis. Nemesis is the goddess of memory.
Right.
And you have all the other goddesses that represent various archetypes in a very similar way that you have Hinduism, like the Shakti or Ganesh and Vishnu, representing various archetypes of destruction and creation and so forth. The Greek philosophers did not believe in Zeus. Like Plato, when you talk about Plotinus, they rejected Zeus, or Xenophanes. They didn't see that as ultimately divine in their eyes. It didn't necessarily make them atheists. They just held a more sophisticated notion of God than that of Zeus, of that of a anthropomorphic entity.
I love this conversation. I love it, and I can go on for another hour. I'm not even lying, but because time,
I respect that.
Absolutely. I do really appreciate you coming on and everything like that and having this conversation with me. Kafei, Titan, thank you so much also for jumping on in and sending what you sent. And Linear, again, thank you for definitely stating, and I 100% agree with Linear, definitely read up on the studies both Titan and Kafei share before the next conversation. I will 100% do that. And we should definitely have another conversation and really just see if the evidence points to one way or the other. That's the number one thing. And if it does, hey.
No, I really appreciate the conversation, man. I really like it, man. Like if you were Matt Dillon to me, you would have hung up with me a long time ago, man.
Yeah, like I'm not a big fan. Like I want to be not hard. I want to be somebody who has conversations with theists, but doesn't come off like an ass, but comes off kind of like, okay, he's not just going to be stating, yes, yes, I understand, yes, and everything like that. Like, I want to push back. I want to be somebody who pushes back, but at the same exact time, here's your opinion as well. Because I
really like that about you, man. You have that dynamic flow about you that, whereas when I call into the atheist experience, it's almost like I'm getting lampooned and they're trying to criticize me at every corner and they don't even let me have a chance to speak. And, whereas you don't do that at all, man.
No. And that's one thing that I also want to do too, whenever I have these conversations and even in the future debates and stuff like that, is that I always want to be me. Like, let me have the conversation with the person. I never liked when people had like three other people jumping in and dogpiling on a person. I find that cowardice. I find that, in a sense, just demeaning to the other individual. Why even have them on your show if you're just going to have people talk all over them?
I've been in that situation. I was like the lone wolf theist amongst atheists, man, trying to defend this stuff. But of course, I'm speaking over 5 other people,
Yeah. So that's the thing. Like, that's something that you will never get on this channel. Is I will not over talk you. I will hear your points. I will try to, if your points make sense, I won't even rebuttal it. I'll be like, okay, that makes sense. Let's continue on and let's continue having the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And you've definitely stuck true to that. That's the whole reason when you invited me again, I agreed to it because I, like I said, I love the last conversation. I love this one. Hopefully you got another.
Oh, we can definitely have a conversation and see where it leads. But for now, again, I've said this like 3 times. Now this is going to be my 4th.
It was necessary. So yeah, go for it, man.
Absolutely. Everybody, thank you so much again. Oh, Kafei, also I have a Discord channel and stuff like that, because I also want to bring theists along onto the Discord channel too, so we can have just conversations in general on the Discord channel and just, have a back and forth, so it's not necessarily just one point of view and only one point of view, you know. So yeah, if you want to join in, please jump on in, join in, and I would love to have a conversation with you, even in the Discord. So it's up to you. I sent you a link inside our private chat. And as I stated, with everybody, have a great night. Thank you for coming in. And tomorrow, we might actually have two shows. So tomorrow, Scott Williamson might have a show with another theist in order to have a debate. So we might have our very first debate show tomorrow, earlier than the other show. And at 9 o'clock, me and Greg Rogers are going to have a fantastic discussion about angels, humans, and God. So come on by and hear that, because I think that's going to be an awesome show for everybody. As for now, have a great night. Thank you so much for staying in. If you like the show, hit that like and subscribe button. And again, have a great night, everybody. Peace.